Hey everybody, I have a video here for you. Now we are flying into a small town in France called Germigny, and I'm going to leave a few links below if you want to check this out a little further. But in this small little town in France, there is a church, and it is about 1,200 years old. And I'll give you a view of it here on Street View. But just kind of a nondescript church that I guess has had a few famous patrons. But here's that church. It's about 1,200 years old, and I believe it has a very piece of artwork that has been kind of lost to history, and lost because the church wants it to be lost, the leaders of the church, and that is for a reason. And if you follow my videos, you know I've talked about the Shroud of Turin and how the church, for some reason, is trying to cover up the origin of where it came from, and that is because it's the same origin as where the New Testament came from. Now let me go inside of this church here. And this is what the central apse of the church looks like. And this is a very unique, beautiful piece of artwork. This is a mosaic containing thousands of tiles. And usually in this part of a church or a cathedral, Jesus or the Virgin Mary might be portrayed up here. But here we have the Ark of the Covenant. And this is not the Ark of the Covenant from the Old Testament. This would have been the Ark of the Covenant of the New Testament if the original story would have been told in full. But let me just take you over here and show you this a little more closely. And I believe this mosaic comes from Odessa, Turkey, and it was made maybe 1800 years ago. This mosaic has gone through a few different owners, but I believe the origin is traced to Odessa, Turkey, and the time when just the very beginnings of what we would call Christianity were being developed. Now, there have been many mosaics discovered in present-day Sanliurfa, ancient Odessa, Turkey, and this church is all about Byzantine Empire kind of styled architecture, and everything fits to this piece of artwork coming from Odessa, Turkey, maybe 1900 years ago. And taking a closer look at this box here, this was an actual box that existed in a church, or maybe a church in a palace in Odessa, Turkey, and the reasons why I say this is we have descriptions of it coming from Odessa, and they all seem to be similar to this one. It says, the old chest was encased with shutters, so that it may not be visible to all whenever they wished. These shutters were opened by the means of iron rods that were thrust through. Then could the congregation gaze upon it. But nobody was allowed to ever draw near it. Thus, holy dread increased their faith, and made them shiver with yet more awe in their worship. And the reason why they were in awe of what was inside, because it was what we know today as the Shroud of Turin. It was known then as the image of Odessa. And that is a perfect description of this chest here with iron rods through it. And obviously the vertical lines here portraying the shutters that are described by so many lucky historians that were lucky enough to see this object about 1800 years ago when it was in this chest, and before it was hid away for centuries, literally till about the middle of the 6th century. But let's go back to this artwork. It also has two angels, one at this side of what appears very much to be a folded up linen on top of this chest. There appears to be an angel at one side, an angel at the other side. And where does this come from? Well, it could come from a Bible verse that was kind of tweaked in the Roman rewrite of what we call the New Testament. And this is John 20, and it describes Mary going into the tomb. And it says, she saw two angels sitting in white, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Now, was this an original reference to the two images on the shroud? Because other verses from apocryphal text say that when they went into the tomb, all they found was the image of the man on the burial cloths. And I think that is what Mary saw. She saw two images which are described as angels on the sheet, or on the burial shroud. And in the Roman rewrite, this is how it came out, where she actually saw and talked to Jesus. Now, how does this relate to the Old Testament, Ark of the Covenant? Well, if you remember from the Old Testament, that was just a box that contained something presumably the tablets that held the Ten Commandments on it, and the biblical writers associated the Ark and what it held, and they said it held the powers of God came from this, and it helped him in battles and stuff like that. And in 544, there was a Persian invasion of town, and the writers of Edessa, Turkey, equated the powers of this special box and the image on the linens that was held, that was stored secretly over the gate of Edessa when they really had to hide the shroud as best they could. And they put it in the gate, and they said the power from the ark that held the shroud repelled a Persian invasion of the year 544. And that is just one of the testimonies of these people from Edessa on how this ark that held the image on the linen that contained a special power. Now, I made a video last September entitled Revealed the Holy Grail, where the knowledge that I had accumulated at that point, I put out the theory that the Shroud of Turin was in fact the Holy Grail. That's been secretly hinted at through history. It was never in Britain. That was a misinterpretation of a word, Pratio Esidorum. And through one misinterpretation, a long time ago, all literal history associated the Holy Grail with Britain. But the word Pratio Esidorum, and I will leave some links below, is talking about the royal palace in Edessa, Turkey. And that's where the Holy Grail was. It's associated with Joseph of Arimathea. And Joseph collects the blood of Christ, supposedly in a cup, but on some early versions of books that are not allowed in the Bible, it says that he collected the blood on the Holy Shroud, and this became the Holy Grail. And I will leave the link to this website below. This is a very good article that links Joseph of Arimathea, the Grail, and the Shroud, all to Edessa, Turkey. And it goes over another book, an apocryphal text called the Acts of Pilate. And Joseph of Arimathea is only mentioned in the New Testament as the one who buys the expensive burial linen to wrap Jesus in after he is crucified. But in the Acts of Pilate, another book the church does not want you to read, Joseph of Arimathea becomes a central character in about chapter 12, and he is actually visited in jail by Jesus, and this is after he is crucified, and the only way Jesus identifies himself to Joseph, because he is confused, is this really Jesus? But Jesus identifies him by the images on the burial linens. I think we have a story that has been wiped away by the church simply because they do not want you to know where this story originated. And it's as simple as that. And it was stored in a box that looks like the Ark of the Covenant. And isn't the Holy Grail and Ark of the Covenant associated? Well, in this New Testament story, it sure is, because the shroud, what was considered the Holy Grail, was kept in a box that looked just like the Ark of the Covenant, and it's depicted on top of a church in France in a small town. And that is a story of the New Testament's Ark of the Covenant. It supposedly held special powers, but it did indeed hold something very sacred to the people of Edessa. It held a linen that somehow the image of one of their kings got emblazoned on, who was involved in the Jewish revolt in 70 AD, and that was a perceived miracle to them, and that's how the whole Shroud of Turin thing got started. And in my next video, I'm going to identify who the Essenes were, where they lived, and where the first books of what we call the Bible, the New Testament, were written. And I'm going to give you the original name for what would become the New Testament. Hope you thought this was interesting. You have a nice day.